Hey, we'll get started in about 10 minutes, just getting people in here. I muted myself really quickly. Don't worry, you'll be able to hear me when I get started. Hey, we're gonna give it a few more minutes to let people roll in through maybe like 7:05, and then we'll get started. Probably go through um, some of the content stuff first, and then we'll go through skills stuff, and then AP reminders for the prep in terms of like preparing for tomorrow, what you'll need, and things that might be useful. So we're gonna wait maybe like let's go till 7:05. So a few more minutes. Just give me a few seconds while I also prep stuff. All right, y'all. We're about to get started. So just a heads up, if you guys can just let me know like who's here, just in the chat. Obviously, if you're on Teams, that doesn't apply to you because I know that you're here. But everyone else, we're gonna go ahead and get started. Thanks, Blair. Sorry. I was just saying to let me know if you're here. Obviously, that doesn't apply to Teams because I know y'all are here. So hey, we're gonna get started. First of all, happy Mother's Day to everyone, and hopefully it's been a a good one, and a restful one, and one where you guys get to celebrate your mothers. Really quickly, those on YouTube, is my mic pretty soft or is it okay? Can you guys hear me? YouTube live people. Okay, cool. Perfect. All right. So sweet. So the goal is to, we'll go from 7 to 9, and hopefully we can cover a few things. The idea is to cover units 1 and 2 today, which is the foundations of government, and then secondly, the branches of government. And then tomorrow morning, probably around 10ish or so, we'll go through unit 3. Just because I think there's a little bit more that, in terms of court cases and whatnot, we'll do the same format, Teams and YouTube Live, if people want to jump in on this. Um, and so, and then today we'll also cover argumentative essay, the foundational documents, what that means. Um, Test taking approach for tomorrow, and yeah, things that you need to just make sure that you're prepared for. So, feel free to throw it in the chat if you are on Microsoft Teams. Throw it in the chat, or um, unmute yourself and ask. Obviously, that's an advantage of being on Teams, but we do want to make sure we get through all of it. So let's get started. um, so we're gonna, just go through like just key concepts of some of these units, right? And really things that you might need to know. I'm not necessarily going to be able to have time to obviously define everything and go through all of that, but I will tell you things to remember. And if you don't remember it, that's kind of your job to go look that up. And if there's clarifications, my goal is to clarify connections between concepts and not necessarily concepts themselves, right? So I might not define all the responsibilities that Congress does, but might talk about how Congress serves as a check to the executive branch and what they can do. And so I might talk about um, some of the responsibilities and stuff like that, right? But not necessarily define every single term. So that's your job to make sure that you're taking notes somewhere on the side to go, oh shoot, I need to key in on this and take some time to review that tonight. And so hopefully we'll make this kind of quick. Um, but hopefully this will be helpful. Just as a reminder, the AP test is units 1, 2, and 3. Units 1 is the foundations of American democracy. Unit 2 is the interactions among branches of government. And Unit 3 is civil liberties and civil rights. So things that apply to, um, American political ideologies and beliefs. So public opinion, data, socialization, all that fun stuff, and political participation from voting, political parties and third parties, things that we spent a lot of time on in class. Unfortunately, those things are not going to be on there. Um, but that means we really can focus and key in on a few of these things. So, Unit 1, Foundations of American Democracy. Um, my guess is that the foundations of American democracy will be on display in your argumentative essay. And when we're looking at the argumentative essay with the 10 foundational documents, remember they're going to give you a couple, and having that graphic organizer uh, that outlines all those things, having evidence from that, having the main points from all those things is going to help you tremendously. Remember, you don't have that much time. You really don't. And so the goal is for you to do that as efficiently as possible, and looking up things, unless you're a really quick reader and a really um, yeah, quick reader. Um, it's gonna it's gonna be really difficult if you don't have it out in front of you, right? So foundations of American democracy. We're looking at one, the ideals of democracy. We started off the year breaking down into the three types, how government's organized, right? Uh, Pluralism, hyperpluralism, and elitism. Looking at how, is it a struggle between a bunch of different groups? Is it a struggle between a few groups that have a lot, or is it a struggle between the rich and the poor, or the strong and those that do not have power, right? Elitism. And so understanding how, is government really for the people? Was it created by the people? And what does that mean in this context of democracy, right? Which is this idea of a majority rule, and who's the majority in this sense. And then we talk about government power and individual rights. And sorry, I'm going to pull up what that is in this thing. Um, Sorry. Okay, so government power and individual rights, we really break down into civil liberties here, so to speak. The creation of the Bill of Rights, and what is this struggle? Why do we need the Bill of Rights? Um, was it necessary to create in the first place? And the really looking at the struggle um, between too much power to the government, and um, a lot of power to the people. Right. We see that in stuff all around us today. We see that in this idea of, why is the government telling me to stay home during this whole thing? Like, they're taking away my freedoms, right? Like, our freedom to make money and to survive is getting hurt because of the governments that has too much power, right? And unlike a lot of different countries, um, the United States has it as a stay-at-home order, but if you're walking around the street or whatever, you're not getting arrested, right? Or if you're protesting the stay-at-home order, as you might have seen a couple weeks ago, those people aren't getting arrested, right? Even though they're violating the stay-at-home order. And so, um, you know, looking and looking at and understanding how Federalist and anti-Federalist views on governmental power differed is an important aspect of at least the foundation of America, and still consistently our struggles for today. Looking at that, though, if you want to look at government power and individual rights, the foundational documents that you're looking at here is Federalist 10 and Brutus 1, okay, which are contrasting sides of the same argument or the same coin, um, which is um, Federalist 10 was the document on factions, right? Um, and that factions can control the government if the government's not too strong or not strong enough. And then um, Brutus 1 talks about the um, benefits of small decentralized republics, and that reminding the early republic of where strong government brought them, right? Which is uh, the monarchy and the struggle between and the tensions between that. Um, and then challenges to the Articles of Confederation. You probably want to know a few weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, just all around. I'm willing to bet that the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution are two documents that you can use, either whether it's the reference documents in the argumentative essay, or if it's an outside source document. Okay, both of those, if you know the weaknesses of like just list down the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation, right? Um, list down why we needed to go into a constitution and maybe how the constitution um, improved on the Articles of Confederation. Um, so yes, so definitely um, looking at that. Um, Couple things: lack of centralized military power, which addressed Shays' rebellion; lack of taxing and law enforcement, right? And so those are a few things that were struggles of the Articles of Confederation that led to the development of the Constitution. And then ratification of the Constitution. Um, so the compromises are huge here. Okay. We're looking at the three fifths compromise, which is every slave, for every five slaves, they count as three people, or every slave counts as three fifths of a person. Um, Looking at the Great Compromise, which is the compromise that has given us the Senate and the House of Representatives, right? The Virginia Plan versus the New Jersey Plan, and and then the Connecticut Compromise, or otherwise known as the Great Compromise, which gave us both. So two houses of Congress serving two different purposes, so that both sides, both the large and the small states, were satisfied. And so um, and then the Electoral College, the use of the Electoral College, and we can talk about the Electoral College when we. Um, actually, we don't have elections anymore, so I think, or voting. So yeah, that's fine. Okay. Um, Remember, these compromises were necessary in order for the Constitution to be passed or ratified, because these were big issues, right? It was not just big versus small states; it was um, slave states, right, with the appeasement of importing. Um, it was a struggle between slave states and free states in terms um, of how they were being represented, right, and how numbers were counted for the population in the United States. Okay, um, and then the ratification of the Constitution in terms of uh, what big compromises were made for those that didn't agree with such power being organized into big government, right? And so the Bill of Rights then comes into play. Federalists taught write the Federalist Papers, trying to convince people of um, the need for ratification, right? And then finding the solution to be, okay, we get your struggles. I mean, all of these points, from freedom of speech, religion, the right to bear arms, the rights of all of the accused, right? From your trial to the jury to, um, and then to the Ninth and Tenth Amendment, talking about federalism, right, which is power given to the states governments and divided between state governments and the central government. Okay, and that is important when we're looking at the relationship between states and federal government, right? When we're talking about um, um, federalism, right? Dual federalism and cooperative federalism. Those are the two terms that you need to know when it comes to federalism. We talked about it as layered cake and marble cake, right? And so we don't really have a layered cake anymore. The A lot of the things that are being dealt with are multi leveled, right? And so talking about how state governments handle things. For example, when we talk about um, building roads, right, or highways, and how the national government does put in money so that to build the roads, and it's also a joint effort between the the state as well. And so, And then in addition to that, I think the not I think the articles and the things that we talked about in class earlier in the year about federalism was this idea of marijuana, right? And drugs and how those are regulated by the Controlled Substance Act, which is a legislative uh a law, right? Um across America, and yet states can choose to legalize marijuana despite its classifications um, as a national drug, right? Um, and so understanding that there's a whole like there's a say, and even today, look at today, every state has its different stay-at-home orders, and even when you listen to um Donald Trump talk about it, like he can give suggestions and he can help roll out certain things that he wants to see happen, but at the end of the day he goes, well, it's up to the governors and how they react to it, right? And that's a big component of that, right? A big component of federalism is that the president can't just say, look, this is what's going to happen. Now, in some senses he can, right? In a lot of senses he can't. Sometimes he can, and we'll talk about the power of the president later. Um, but in the sense of, well, governors have their jobs and responsibilities too. They don't just it's not just some like arbitrary title that they hold to that has power, right? They have the right to control to a certain degree their states as well. Um so a big part in though how Donald Trump or the executive office or the president and the three, yeah, mainly the president, how they can control and the legislative branch as well, I guess, how they can control states to enforce certain things. One of the examples of that was uh, of drinking laws, right? Why are all drinking laws 21 except states have certain uh, nuances within their laws? Well, remember things like grants, so money from the government given to the states. Um, are dependent on the state's following. So if you don't want that money, you don't have to. Just don't follow that law, right? But what does a state like California have to lose by saying, okay, you know what? I mean, we don't really care how young, maybe 18 years old would be a good age for drinking. Um, but we get this much money if we say 21, boom, we're going to do that, right? And so this concept of federal categorical grants, block grants. We talk about mandates, right? Which is like when the government says you have to do it without uh, maybe giving any money or anything like that. So, and then federal revenue sharing. How does that look like when we talk about taxes, right? There's state taxes and there are federal taxes, and money going to both. And therefore, when we pay our taxes, is not just to um, the federal government, but is also to the state government as well. So I think there is a lot in this, and I feel like that could be a important concept to understand. So I really would try to at least know the differences between the grants, mandates, and the relationships between these two. You're looking at federalism and the 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights. So for some reason, it comes up as one of the questions. You're looking at the 10th Amendment, and um, and yeah, okay. Um, let's see. Principles of the American government, knowing separation of powers and checks and balances, and how those two things work, can be useful. Obviously, we're going to get into checks and balances and the separation of powers really soon. But knowing that as a principle of the American government, in terms of when we had the American Revolution and the things that we were not happy about with Great Britain, those are the things that we took and shifted and created our own principles of government. Um, One of the things that is an important concept is this idea of the scope of government, right? How much power does government have and how much is it limited? Things that increase the scope of government um, give more reach to the government, while when you limit the scope of government, it is restricting or um, yeah, it's restricting like what government uh, can do in intervene in your everyday lives and in our political and social lives and stuff. And so, and then this idea of access points as stakeholders or as people that exist in this country, we need to have multiple access points. Not, I mean, obviously, as the president or as a congressman or woman, as a governor, as a mayor, like you have large access points, right? But we don't get those same forums, right? We don't get the same platforms as that. What access points do we have, right? And some of those access points are in Unit 4 and 5 when we talk about, well, you could join a political party, right? The media is an access point. Um, the uh, interest groups are an access point, right? Voting is an access point. That's how we interact with government. And so the idea that one of the major principles of government is that we have the ability to be involved in government and the choices, which is not the same, or which is not can this cannot be said of many other countries, right? And so this democratic majority republic type of view of government is very unique to the United States government, and that is important. When the founders were creating that, they didn't want someone just telling the people what to do. They wanted the people to be involved and be a part of the political process, which would one ensure checks and balances, right? Because then people that are not happy can run for office, or people that are not happy can vote for who they want to be in office, and they're not just being told what to do. Um, and then let's see. Uh, Balancing of power, so constitutional interpretations of federalism. I guess it's connecting to what we said um, before, but this idea of the Commerce Clause and the Necessary and Proper Clause of the Constitution, um, things that when we look at um, the relationships between the central government and the state governments, those relationships have been interpreted differently throughout the history of the United States. From the early on when we were really sensitive to what government should do and what they really shouldn't do, to opening up for more power to um, the government as time went on. Two key court cases here: McCulloch versus Maryland and United States versus Lopez. Um, McCulloch versus Maryland talked about the implied powers of Congress to create laws, and the supremacy of the laws and supremacy of the Constitution over states, right? So McCulloch versus Maryland goes, yeah, and you can look up the details of that, but implied powers over states, and that the Constitution's laws are greater than states' laws. Um, United States versus Lopez. Um, okay, United States versus Lopez. Congress may not use a Commerce Clause to make a possession of a gun in a school zone of federal crime, introducing a new phase of federalism that recognized the importance of state sovereignty and local control. So giving power to um, the states and saying, look, like we have power too. Like you can't just you can make your laws, but in local areas and in state areas, that your laws might not necessarily supersede the laws of a state, right? That's different than the Constitution and the Commerce Clause, and different in terms of how the Supreme Court can interpret certain cases and whatnot. Um, so um, yeah, and then federalism in action. Yeah, I think just looking at policy making and how that affects things between the United States and the central government. So I'm gonna take a couple minutes for you guys to ask any questions that you might have. Um, if you do have a question, just feel free to type it out. If you have a comment or want me to elaborate on something specifically within Unit 1, do that right now. I'll give you guys a few minutes. Any questions? The main part of Unit 1 that you should know. Yes, questions about Unit 1. Um, Honestly, you need to know, if you know the Constitution. Um, if you know the Constitution, you know Unit 1 better. You'll be okay. But that being said, remember everything's more limited now, so you really need to know a lot of it as much as possible. I'd say know all of it, honestly. Any other questions? Give you another minute. The question is not whether you agree with Brutus 1 or not. The question is, what effect did Brutus 1 have? Right? Um, I can't tell you if I agree with it or not. I don't think there's necessarily. Just remember that as you write your argumentative essay, um, you can argue one side or another, but don't get too wrapped up in opinions. Oh, yeah, don't get too wrapped up in opinions. Um, make sure that your argument is solid based off of the facts and what you know. I think that's going to be really important, because you're going to get tempted to, in your argumentative essay, you're going to get tempted to just write your opinions the whole time. And that can be good to some extent, but mainly a downfall just because of, um, excuse me, just because of, um, yeah, then you're writing not so much based off of facts. All right, we're gonna get into Unit 2. Unit 2 is talking about the branches of government. Okay. So the Unit 2 at a glance, I'm just gonna run through all of the different sections and then we'll go through each one individually. Um, Unit 2 starts off with Congress, the Senate, and the House of Representatives, the structures, the powers, and functions of Congress, and congressional behavior. How does Congress interact with other countries, other branches of government? Yes, Oscar, I will post it. Um, the second part is the roles and powers of the president. The check. How do other branches check on the president? How is presidential power expanded within this last century or so? Presidential communication. How does the president share his thoughts? Okay, and share news, I guess you would say. And then the judicial branch, the court in action, checks on the judicial branch, and then lastly, the bureaucracy, um, and policy making within the bureaucracy. That's when we talk about the Iron Triangle and how, uh, yeah, how do these all tie in together as branches of government? And so, hopefully, that's um, as I just talked through some of this, that it would refresh your memory just a little bit. Um, I'd like to think that the FRQ, I mean, whether it's civil liberties or civil rights, or like, here's the thing, you get two questions, right? So I'm going to the structure of the test, but you get two questions, one argumentative essay and one free response question. I'm essentially going to say one of them has to do with the three branches of government, and one of them has to do with civil rights and civil liberties, because the foundational documents and that stuff should be explained in the argumentative essay. That way, they cover all their bases. So, I'm pretty sure that's how it's going to be. I doubt that they would have both FRQs, and the FRQ and the argumentative essay, on checks and balance or on the three branches of government. I may be wrong, but I mean, to show the breadth of knowledge, I think is important here. So, excuse me. Um, cool. Let's talk about Senate and the House of Representatives. You know, look up a list of the different responsibilities, or if you have it on the OneNote, it was that chart that I had you guys fill in the blank that one time. Okay. I would have that out as a cheat sheet. That, I mean, your OneNote should be your cheat sheet. Make sure your OneNotes are accessible when you guys are writing your essay. And I think that could be really beneficial. Um, let's see. Yeah, knowing what they're constituted of. The Senate is two per state. The House of Representatives, excuse me, House of Representatives is proportional representation and is determined by the census every 10 years, with reapportioned seats, right? In Congress, there are um, eh, within Congress, there are limitations based off of your term lengths, right? From House of Representatives to being 2 years, to the Senate being 6 years, and understanding that, um, yeah, that they are limited by term, and also limited by enumerated powers that are stated within the Constitution, but also have implied powers within the Constitution, right? Things like passing a budget, raising revenue, declaring war. Um, and so all of this obviously is found within the Constitution, but there are split differences. You can't just lump the House of Representatives and the Senate in together. They have uh, different responsibilities. Um, Republican ideal in the United States. So structures and powers and functions of Congress. Um, oh, okay. So this is talking about how congressional procedures differ. Remember when we talk about how laws are passed, right? And that whole like, I'm just a bill. Yes, I'm only a bill, right? That cartoon thing by Schoolhouse Rock. Um, and then how things actually looked when we were running our congressional simulation, right? And in the simulation, I asked you guys if you guys wanted to be the Senate or the House of Representatives. I think you guys said the Senate. I think you guys were reenacting the Senate, if I remember correctly. And things like the filibuster, things like the House Rules Committee, right? So remember, the in the Senate, you can hold a filibuster, which is you can have unlimited debate on a certain topic, which then stops or prevents future laws that are on the table to get on the board. Versus the House of Representatives, which the majority party has control over the House Rules Committee, which allows them to uh, dictate how. Oh no, we were the House Rules Committee because I think you guys limited time. Yeah, per debate for it. So the House Rules Committee, where you guys, where the majority party would be able to limit speech or debate for certain bills, uh, you know, depending on the bill and dependent on the decisions of the House Rules Committee, right? And so things like that are just two of the key examples, I would think, when we're talking about the organization and procedures of the House of Representatives and the Senate. Um, the role of the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate, filibuster, and the word cloture, cloture, and then um, yeah, how committees are organized. Okay, that those are important as well. Um, and then also the function of Congress, which is the budgeting power, right? Which is Congress has control of the purse. They have control of how money is being spent, how money can be spent. Well, partial control because they need to agree with the president, right? Key example of this: Donald Trump's promise in 2016 was he was going to build a wall. Why couldn't he not build the wall? Why did we go into shutdown? Um, Last year. That was last year, right? Why did we go into shutdown a couple times last year? Um, what was this whole deal of the shutdown? Why didn't we really feel it? But some people did. Well, this idea of that is Congress and the president's um, um, the president's Office of Management and Budget, sorry, OMB, um, couldn't come to an agreement, right? And obviously, the wall's not being built, and that had to do with the DACA too, right? And so um, they have to put together a budget that then goes to the president. President has his budget, and they come and talk about what they can budge on, and for different reasons, um, and yeah, and so that does create differences um, in the budget, and that is part of Congress's power. Then talking about congressional behavior, ideological divisions within Congress. Um, what does this mean? Well, this leads to things like gerrymandering and redistricting. We're talking about uh, oh, I don't know if we ended up doing this activity this year. Um, but when you can redistrict a community to have uh, the majority party or a minority party still be in control, that's actually kind of important. If you look up how redistricting works, how gerrymandering works, you can see an example. The main example is actually really interesting, and you can see it. It's just how you draw lines within a county or a district. So, um, elections in Congress have led to divided government, right? When we look at divided government, we are looking at and understanding how partisanship is uh, very evident within Congress, right? Obviously, partisanship can be seen in the presidential um, office, but at any given time, it's one party there. Versus in Congress, at any given time, at every given time, there's two plus the independent minority parties that might be in there. But the reality is that within Congress, it's always a tension between parties, right? It's always the left versus the right. When we had our simulation, we had the left side versus the right side, right? And then when someone was going out to talk their bill and try to pass their bill, people on each side were conspiring and trying to figure out, hey, how do we not let it pass, or how do we we need this one to pass? No, let's not let this one pass. And so this idea of um, division and partisanship within Congress is one of the behaviors, and creates like this competition, so to speak, to make things um, pass. And um, yet is so polarizing and so divisive within our governmental processes. Um, Court cases that relate to congressional behavior, Baker versus Carr is one of them. Okay. Making sure you guys understand how Congress works too. That's definitely important. Bill procedures, um, and whatnot. Yeah, yeah. So Edgardo, I'm gonna finish up this part, and then we're gonna talk about structures and rubrics and stuff like that. So, if that's what you're tuned in for, then maybe in like 15 minutes you can tune back, or 20 minutes. But otherwise, I'm just gonna keep going with this so we can get there. Presidential power and the checks on presidency. How does a president implement policy agenda? Because remember, the president doesn't pass laws or make laws, but they can make things called executive orders. Um, they engage in foreign policy, right? And they um, they can veto, right? They can veto and pocket veto, which allows a president to check Congress, right? Um, all of you should, or many of you should remember the vetoes. When who was it? Was it Miss Tessier? I think it's Miss Tessier was vetoing bills in our simulation. Um, and that was a check, right? That's a check on that the president has on other branches of government. Checks on the presidency. Remember, the president has a cabinet. The president has the Secretary of State, of Education, of defense. There's all these different secretaries in within the bureaucracy, and remember that Congress checks the presidency on approving or denying uh, those, right? Um, and yeah, Senate confirmation. Um, yeah, knowing your triangle of checks and balances and stuff is actually going to be important. I'd have some visual or some sense of that, just so you can be able to write on each of those pretty quickly, if possible. Um, Expansion of federal of presidential power. Terms of office and constitutional power restrictions. 22nd Amendment is related here, and Federalist 70. Take a look at that. Um, let's see. Presidential communication. How has that changed throughout the years? Quick history timeline, from the first radio debates, right, to how FDR had his fireside chats and used the radio to communicate, to television and news and media. relaying the information to um, now using the internet, right? To now our current president using Twitter, right? To how is those are the ways that communicate things are being used, social media and whatnot, to communicate and respond to political issues. Um, n- the State of the Union is one of the official ways, right, that the president communicates to the people and um, to the United States. Okay. And then talking about the judicial branch, right? This leads to our court case of Marbury versus Madison. This leads to Federalist 78. Okay, just have that to look through. Okay, um, and that the expansion of judicial power is comes from um, them determining whether something is constitutional or not, right? And so knowing that the uh, that judicial review, this concept of judicial review, sorry, I was blanking for a second. Judicial review is a major component of the judicial branch's power, because very little is actually said in the Constitution in terms of giving what they have the power to rule on. It didn't take until Marbury versus Madison in the early 1800s, 1803, right, where they were able to actually talk about um, the concept of judicial review and the Supreme Court um, being able to rule on things and overrule things. Um, then we look at the legitimacy of the judicial branch. We talk about the isolation from partisan politics, right? We talk about the isolation of the uh yeah, that they're not voted on by parties left or right. They are um appointed or selected by the presidential office, judges, and uh, Supreme Court judges, right? So we're talking everything from level one all the way to the highest level of courts. They all they have they're appointed by the president or selected by the president, and then they have to go through Senate confirmation. Now, obviously, at the higher level of the Supreme Court, we've seen uh, Justice Kavanaugh, and I'm blanking on the other one's name again. But we see that their trials and them and bringing up their whole past, opening up that whole book, um, leads to a almost like a public trial, right, of these Supreme Court justices. But in the end, um, the Senate has to approve that. And so, can party have a little bit of it? But yes, but not really, because they can't really explicitly say there are this type of judge or whatever, right? Um, you can see it in their rulings, but it's not going to be explicitly said. Um, Remember also, just because the president wants them doesn't mean they can control their actions. There is no veto on a Supreme Court ruling, right? And so part of this isolation within government, and also the fact that they have their lifers, right? They are in there for life and whatnot, means that they can't really be controlled. Like, they could choose to vote one way and then choose to vote another way the next time, right? They can choose to vote seemingly more conservative and then seemingly more liberal, right? But in the end, it's up to them. It's them and themselves, right? Um, and so that's actually really important. Um, um, yeah, and I guess that's how it talks about legitimacy. So understanding that. So just because they're isolated doesn't mean they have no check, right? Um, restrictions on the Supreme I'm just going to read this part out. So restrictions on the Supreme Court are represented by congressional legislation to modify impact of prior Supreme Court decisions. So the Congress can create laws to um, redefine or restructure things that might have been ruled on before, and then the courts would then have to rule on it again, right, as another check. Amendments. The Supreme Court, their guidebook is the Constitution. So if there's an added amendment, such as when we're talking about the 13th, 14th, 15th, and the Reconstruction Amendments, now they got to start to redefine, okay, what does that mean? Right? What does it mean in terms of slavery? Well, now we can't actually say slavery is okay because it really literally says that slavery is not allowed in here. Right? Checks on the branch are judicial appointments and confirmations. Okay, adding another uh, justice in or replacing one. Presidents and the states evading or ignoring Supreme Court decisions. Now, this doesn't really happen that often, but if you do remember in Georgia, Cherokee versus Georgia, that's not the name of it. Dang it. Does anyone remember Andrew Jackson? Is it Cherokee versus Georgia? I think it might be Cherokee versus Georgia. Um, where the Supreme Court ruled on the side of Native Americans that that was their sovereign land. They were entitled to that land given to them by the United States prior as their territory. And then Andrew Jackson says, okay, cool. They made their decision. Now let's have them enforce it. And then that's when the Trail of Tears happens and he forces them out, anyways. Right. And so, um, allowing and understanding that that is a potential check, which is like, well, they can't enforce it, so they're just making these laws. So they need the help of other branches to help enforce it. And then last part of this unit two is this idea of bureaucracy. Okay, and the idea of bureaucracy is complicated in the sense of um, what their job is. And I talked about their two different jobs, right? Anyone remember what those two different jobs were? Talking about regulation and implementation. Okay. So the idea of bureaucracy is that they need to implement laws and then they also need to regulate laws, right? You can't just implement a law and if you don't regulate it, no one's going to follow it. So what's the point of implementing it in the first place, right? And then that's when I think I went through in the lectures about how different um different bureaucracies struggled, right? When you make the implementation of a law too vague, um, you're in trouble, right? If you can't regulate it because it's too restrictive and you don't have the manpower, then it's also right. It's like a double-edged sword, right? Um, so regulating and implementation, ways to enforce and to regulate is the idea of um, like issuing fines, right? Monetary punishments um, that stops a lot of people from doing things that they shouldn't be doing, right? When you're talking about, okay, if you don't adhere to these CO2 emissions from your factories, then you will get slapped on with this fine. And so then obviously people are going to fix and adjust that. The bureaucracy is the connection with the private sector, right? We talk about the private sector, um, public owned um, things. And so mm, knowing that the bureaucracy um, gets involved with privately owned businesses and whatnot, right? That's actually really important. Um, then we talk about issue networks and iron triangles. I think I should be able to get to that towards the end of this. But knowing the impact of how bureaucracy as the executive branch, Congress as the uh, the legislative branch, and then um, interest groups, private groups that um, rally to support specific bills, create these relationships that make laws difficult to break or easier to pass through. And so we'll talk through that. Bureaucracy. We also talk about this idea of this Pendleton Civil Service Act when we talk about why am I blanking on the terms meritocracy uh and doing things by favor, right? I don't know why I'm blanking out on the two terms. But you either earn it through like a test, right? Or you get it as a favor and not partisanship. Um, yeah, I'll look that up and hopefully I'll get that to you guys tomorrow. Um, Discretionary and rulemaking authority. So talking about federal bureaucracy implements federal policies. So things like homeland security, transportation, education, um, environmental protection agency, the Federal Elections Commission, Securities and Exchange Commission. These federal agencies are used to regulate and to implement public policies. Key example that I think I used when I was teaching on this. Um, this idea of Common Core. Now, you guys have heard of it. Some of you guys are like, I don't like Common Core, right? In my teacher program a couple years ago, or when Common Core started to roll out, I was like, I don't like it, right? Like, why does it take a paragraph to explain math, and when 1 + 1 = 2, like, why I gotta write a whole paragraph on it? The Department of Education was asked to roll out Common Core. But yet, in a federalism type of way, they couldn't force state education systems to use the Common Core. So instead, they incentivized it. So the Department of Education goes, well, whichever state does the best and shows the highest score raising with Common Core is going to get money, right? And so states all tried it. A lot of states tried it. I think there's 2 states that didn't try it. Um, or 2 states that ended up not fully implementing it, right? One of those states is New York City or New York. New York decided that they want to opt out of the Common Core program because they felt that the training to implement Common Core and all that stuff was too much and wasn't going to pay off in terms of how much they would receive afterwards. So bureaucracies get to do that. That's how they implement it, right? Um, Implementing, hey, if you use OneNote, I will give you extra credit. Now, you might not have to use OneNote, but all of you guys are going to use OneNote, right? That's one way of saying it, right? One way of pretty much forcing everyone to do it, but not forcing everyone to do it. That happens all across, right? Obviously, certain things like the Homeland Security and Veterans Affairs, like there's all these different ways that you know they have to follow certain rules and maybe aren't as they implement it in different ways. Okay, and then holding bureaucracy accountable. So holding committee hearings and then the power of the purse, meaning Congress goes, look, we told you guys to implement this and enforce this. We gave you money, and now you didn't really show any results. So we're not going to put as much money into you anymore, right? If you're not effective, you get less money, right? That's essentially the power of the purse, right? Um, think of it as when you uh, want to, when you're like, oh, mom, I want to do this, and then they give you money, and then you end up not like doing what you're supposed to do with that money. You go to the movies or buy a pair of sneakers or something like that instead. Next time you go, well, I want sneakers. Then you go, You didn't really buy sneakers last time, or you didn't use the money effectively. Maybe you did buy sneakers, but you bought crappy sneakers and used the rest of the money on something else. They're gonna go, okay, your parents are gonna go, well, okay, here's less money since you're gonna buy crappy sneakers anyways. Buy crappy sneakers with this, right? So this idea of power of the purse, in terms of limiting bureaucracies and their effectiveness in that. Okay. Um, Presidential ideology, authority, and influence affect how executive branch agencies carry out the goals of the administration. There's constant critique on how bureaucracies are rolling things out. Uh, I'll give you one quick example of today, right? Today's news, maybe not today, but this week, I read on this thing on colleges and universities will no longer require their coaches and athletic people to mandatory report instances of abuse or like sexual abuse to cover their own butt, right? Front person on this news thing is Betsy DeVos, the Secretary of Education, right? And she's come under a lot of fire. Um, and that looks bad, right? And that looks bad on a few things. That looks bad on, well, the president that appointed her was Trump, right? But the same thing goes for past presidents too, right? And Obama's administration did implement this idea of Common Core, right? And then George Bush's uh, cabinet secretary of education implemented this idea of no child left behind, which increased all the testing that we had. So again, no one's perfect, but just know that um, that presidential ideology allows them to select people that follow that ideology. Okay, that Betsy DeVos acts in conjunction with the ideologies of um, President Trump. Cool. And then policy in the branches of government. Man, like I hope that you guys have some sort of understanding and grasp on um, how laws are made, the policies, and how all different um, branches of the government come together to impact one piece of legislation. For everything from the judicial branch's interpretation of the law, right? To Congress passing actually the law, to the president vetoing and trying to get votes for certain laws and whatnot. If you guys remember last year, we watched the I think it was for extra credit. We watched Lincoln on Netflix, right? And it showed about Abraham Lincoln trying to pass the 13th Amendment, right? And so constantly, like, man, these uh three branches of government are in this wrestle of laws that are being passed, voting for and against. And obviously not everything can be passed because laws can contradict each other and there's only so much money that can be used, right? And then lastly the bureaucracy and coming together. Then comes this whole issue though, right? This whole issue of interest groups. Now, interest groups is in, I think, one of the other sections. I think it's in unit 4, but you got to know that under the iron triangle, interest groups play a part in this, right? And so an interest group like the NRA or Mothers Against Drunk Driving or whatever interest group you want, um, they raise money and they try to pass specific policies, right? And political parties try to get people elected. And so if they want to get elected, they need money. And if they need that money, technically they are going to support whatever wherever they're getting that money from, right? Now obviously usually mostly it aligns with some of their views already, right? I am pro second amendment. Okay, cool. The NRA is going to support you. You heard it time and time again in these debates, right? Bernie made it very clear, um the NRA hates me. I'm in their top like 10 most like not like politicians or whatever because I'm not going to take money from them and they publicize it like that's my badge of honor, right? He said it. The NRA. So the NRA on the flip side will support other candidates, right? And will give them money. The catch is, well, when you get elected, we want something on the table. We want to know that you're going to fight for XYZ, right? And those people get elected. Now, just because you get elected, though, this is the third part of the triangle because you got the interest groups connecting to Congress, right? That part's the easy part. But just because you get elected doesn't mean that the laws will be implemented and regulated, right? You just make the law. You need someone that can implement and regulate and make sure. Let's just say we're going anti-Second Amendment, right? We want to make sure that there are more gun restrictions. Well, you're going to need part of the bureaucracy to implement, because you can say this is a law, right? But we know that in our modern context of purchasing a firearm, that there are a lot of things that aren't going right, right? Whether we're talking about um, uh, anyone could just walk into a store and show their ID and they can get a gun, right? Maybe that's not the case here, but background checks aren't good enough, right? The bureaucracy Congress can make a law saying to require background checks, but unless the bureaucracy goes into the gun stores and goes, look, let's check and hold you guys accountable and let's regulate this law, that doesn't work. And that's where the third part of the triangle comes in, which is we're going to regulate, we're going to implement. Okay, what do we get out of it? Right. And that goes to this back and forth of like, hey, we'll help pass some of these laws and this will benefit you and we'll give some and we'll take some. So that's our triangle. Make sure you guys understand that a little bit more. I'm sure you could watch a more informational video that'll explain that a little bit better. So that's unit 1 and unit 2. Any questions on unit 2? I'll give you guys 2 minutes to ask any questions on unit 2 and then we'll get to the testing part of it. Type in your questions real quickly. Oh, I didn't actually talk about presidential roles, huh? Um, I think it could come up. I think this idea of presidential roles and knowing chief of um, the chief executive, chief of state. Um, yeah, I think you need to know those. I don't know if they'll. I don't. I doubt that they would spend that much time asking you about it, but I would have that in part of your study guides or your cheat sheets. Any other questions? One more minute for any more questions about that. It's a good question, Jimena. Okay, and just a reminder, Edgardo asked it, but I will be posting this if you need to review any of those units later. I'm sure YouTube has some people that are really good at explaining it, like crash courses and stuff like that. So feel free to do that. I won't take any offense. Lastly, we're gonna maybe spend the next 20 minutes talking about structure, and then we'll spend some time talking about the uh, what do you call it? Test taking procedures and stuff like that. So, structure. I talked about um, two FRQs, right? The first one is an argumentative essay. That's where if you guys have the packet, I think it's like the third or fourth page after the AP thing. Um, looking at question 1 is an argumentative essay. So, It is out of 7 points. You get 1 point for the claim or your thesis. You get 4 points for using evidence, 2 points, uh, 2 pieces of specific and relevant evidence to support the claim or thesis. Okay. Um, and then, sorry, hold on. Let me see where this is at. This should have been double sided. Remember, it's 2 points that are relevant, but you get one from a foundational document and one from an outside piece. So they're going to give you three um, sources if they follow the same format, but they should give you two or three options to choose from, and then one of them you must use, and then you must use a second piece of outside source. Right now, one of the outside sources, again, they give 10 foundational documents, and if you look at the foundational document sheet within the packet, I think I show that they're branched off into sections, right? And so you want to make sure that you have, if it's talking about separation of powers, they're going to list a few of those, but you might be able to find the other one that's in that chart to throw out there, right? Um, yes, that'll be definitely important. And then um, let's see. So here's the thing about row B. If you're looking at this rubric that I had sent out in the AP packet, otherwise you could download it on Teams, or you could just look up AP US Government Politics Scoring Rubric for 2020. Again, I would highly advise that you have this out when you're writing your argumentative essay, right? Have it out, and when you write your thesis, you go, does my thesis respond to the prompt rather than restating it, or am I just restating it? I'm just restating it. Cool. Let me go and try to approach that again, right? Um, Rather than that, make sure you have this and you go, no, it doesn't just restate it. I actually have a point and I'm establishing a line of reasoning. What does establishing a line of reasoning mean? Well, it means that you're making a claim that, um, the system of checks and balances was effective because it did this, this, this. In A push, it was the groupings, right? In A push, you have to group your documents. Here, you don't have to group your documents because you're not required to use 6 out of the 7 documents. Excuse me. Here, you are being asked to lay out some of your reasons so you could defend it within your argumentative essay. Okay. Here's the thing: the argumentative essay doesn't tell you how many paragraphs you need. So you want to spend your intro laying it out, and then you want to spend maybe about 10 minutes writing 2 or so paragraphs, one on each of those documents, and maybe a third one on a supportive document or a supportive reasoning. And we'll talk about that and how in row C, right? But once you get row A done, I check that off on your rubric tomorrow. Once you're done with it, then you go to row B. If you go on 1 or 2 points, you provide one piece of evidence or 2 pieces of evidence that are relevant to the topic of the prompt. Relevancy doesn't get you full points. Relevancy gets you half points. Okay. You should get an easy 5 points here by having 2 pieces of evidence that are specific and relevant to support your claim or your thesis. So once you have your claim or your thesis, you have your line of reasoning. You're saying checks and balances is necessary for our government to be successful. Edgardo, you need 2 pieces to get 4 points. Okay. One piece of evidence needs to be one of the 3 that they list for you. The second one needs to be an outside source. So you need 2 pieces. Don't do one. Doing one gets you max 1 point out of 4. That's 25%. If you're satisfied with 25%, 25% of a 5-point test is a 1 point whatever, right? So 1.25. So don't do one. You need to have 2. Okay. Responses that earn 2 points. Let's just say you're okay with getting half your points. You must provide two examples of evidence relevant to the topic of the prompt. How your approach to this, it needs to be you have an argument. Yeah. Now, your thesis and your argument, your claim is getting you um to argue that point, to prove that checks and balances was necessary. Let's just say that's my example for today. Okay. In that, you have to reference, let's just say Federalist 10, this idea of factions controlling government. Um, is one of your arguments. You would go, well, in Federalist 10, and you would have quotations. Yes, any of those other documents or any other documents. Remember, they give you 10 that you have in your graphic organizer, and it could be any other document or any other concept. And I'm going to talk about the concept part in a second, right? But I want to make sure you guys understand how to bring out the evidence within a document. So you're going to take Federalist 10, you're going to take an excerpt within Federalist 10. Why would you know an excerpt? Well, it's an open note test. And in the graphic organizer, there's literally a section that I put in there for you guys so that you guys can put pieces of evidence that define or are the key points to those foundational documents. So every single one, if you've done it right, you should have a graphic organizer of all 10 foundational documents, some excerpts that are in there that allow you to quote from there. Now, all of a sudden, you don't just have evidence; you have specific and relevant evidence. If you use a graphic organizer, that's going to get you 3 points, at least from the documents that you have. Now, talking about outside sources now tell you that you need to bring out something else from your knowledge. So um, when you're being asked a about checks and balances and government control, um, your outside source can be a court case. Okay, your outside source could be a could be a concept that you know. So, for example, let's just say the essay is about federalism. Well, your outside source could be the our assignment on marijuana and bringing that out, right? This concept of federalism in drugs and marijuana um, could be any of those things, right? And so you want to make sure that um, you have those things at hand. So 3 points should be easy because you got the specific piece of evidence. You're using a second source, and then you're to get the final 4 points out of the four, which is obviously the point. Bring something from your knowledge, okay? And I think that's really important. Okay. Um, let's see. Um, Edgardo, does that make sense? The other piece of evidence, this is in the rubric, right? The other piece of evidence can come from a different foundational document or from knowledge of course concepts. So if one of those foundational documents is not in listed in there, I'll give you the biggest example is using the Constitution. Okay, if the Constitution is not listed as one of the three that they give you, use the Constitution. It's going to be able to cover a lot of different things, or a court case. Okay, those are definitely big. So that's 5 points out of five. Okay. Using y'all. Yeah. What's up? I'm talking about the argumentative essay. Okay. One of the threes listed and one of the seven they don't list is a good key way to think about it. Yes. It could be. It just can't be one of the ones that's listed. Right. But sometimes don't force one, right? Don't go like, well, letters of Birmingham jail from Birmingham jail are not going to be in there. So I'm just going to use that to try to define. No, like that's not going to help you unless it's actually part of it. Court cases are huge, right? Those are specific pieces of evidence, right? Man, if you throw out a court case that's relevant to that, that's a money point right there, right? Like easy. Okay. Um, and concepts are a little bit iffy. You need to make sure you define the concept. Here's my next part about talking about evidence. Okay. In Gov, vocab is one of the biggest concepts of it. What you need to see is that in Gov, you need to define and define the concept, define what it's talking about. So if you just say Federalist 10 and factions, you actually need to spend that paragraph explaining what Federalist 10 is talking about in terms of factions. What does factions mean, right? And then it's going to uh um yeah. So that's gonna help you develop your paragraphs. Make sure you explain every part of it, right? That whole thing that you do in elementary school, which is like why does that happen? And why does that happen? But tell me why. Like, like your teachers used to do that. Like do that to yourself and write out that paragraph. Jasmine, so if you run out of time, so uh I'm forgetting the timing on this. I think is it 25 minutes? I think it's 25 minutes and 5 minutes to, yeah, it'll tell you 5 minutes before you're given time to wrap it up. And then you have to submit it. So depending on what format you're using, if you're typing straight into it, copy paste, submitting a document, you have that time to make sure you submit that. Um, Go ahead, Luis. No, it's an essay. It's literally you need to have a thesis and you need to have paragraphs that are explaining it. Okay. So, um, so then in addition to that, um, let's see. Yeah, make sure you look at the rubric. It's going to be really helpful. Okay. Row C and the last part to get 2 points. Okay. 1 point explains how or why one piece of evidence supports or claims or the thesis. Um, and then 2 explains how or why two pieces of evidence support or claim to the thesis. So if you can explain the relationship with the evidence provided and the claim or thesis for both pieces of evidence, you get that. Now, wait, Mr. Lee, isn't that what we're doing when we provide the evidence or thesis? No. You get 4 points for explaining the evidence, and then another point connecting the evidence, right? That's huge because it's not asking you to do too much. It's asking you make a claim, two pieces of evidence, explain those two really well. So you're spending a paragraph talking about what is Federalist 10. You're spending a paragraph talking about the Constitution and that concept of it. And then you could spend a few sentences connecting why this and why that, right? Why Federalist 10 connects to your argument that checks and balances is really, really important, or why the Constitution explains or doesn't just, you can't just say the Constitution talks about checks and balances. You have to talk about why the Constitution needed checks and balances, right? And when you connect that, that's going to give you, that's going to give you all 7 points. The reality is the content shouldn't be too difficult. Okay. The content's there, especially because it's open note. It's just how can you put it all together and how do you make sure that you are um, clear in defining it, right? Again, row B talks about talking about what each of those are. Okay. Um, what the source is and what's your outside source that you've chosen. Any questions on the argumentative essay?
Mr. Lou, I didn't get a chance to go get that packet that you sent out.
Okay.
Where is that rubric so that I can print it out?
Okay, so the packet is actually on Power School on the right side of AP Review. I am
Perfect.
I am thinking, would if anyone here did not get the packet, I have a few. I printed one out for everyone. So I have a bunch in my bag right now. The question is if I open up school or if I go in front of school tomorrow morning, is anyone trying to pick it up if they didn't pick it up already? So let me know. Message me out. Message me on Jupiter or something. I can do something tomorrow to get that all for you guys because it's a pretty hefty packet.
How many pages is it? Like, do you know around how many it is?
I think it's like 30.
Oh shit.
Yeah. So yeah, message me and then we'll see what we can do to get it to you. Okay. And anyone else that didn't get it, um, I'll talk about the packet in a second. Actually, when we get to test procedures. Um, okay, cool. So that's the argumentative essay. The second one is a FRQ. Your normal FRQ. Think of it as your short answer question from a push. Um, think of it as literally. Sorry, Oscar is asking about the argumentative essay. So 3 paragraphs. First, your thesis, contextualization. No contextualization in this. You don't have to give context. Just give your defensible claim and your thesis, and then yeah, I would have a fourth paragraph really to talk about why you connect all of those things together by connecting it and putting all your rationale behind your in your fourth paragraph. That's going to give you a pretty good essay. So the FRQ is kind of like your normal FRQ. You're really going to answer all parts of it. One of the key things actually in the packet, I think I print out the AP verbs thing for you one more time. Maybe not. Did I not print out the AP verbs? I swear I put it in. Yeah. So AP verbs, right? So list, compare, identify. I've given y'all this like God knows how many times. Literally, like I've literally given this to y'all so many times. It's everywhere. When you are writing your FRQ, when it asks you to do something, follow this list. Now you have this in front of you. I used to ask people to memorize it, right? When it tells you to compare, make sure you give basic differences. When it tells you to identify, which is a key one, or describe, you need to write the definition for the key words. Every FRQ is going to have a definition. We've been doing FRQs every Friday with AP Classroom, so it should be a habit. Those of you guys that have been practicing it, awesome. You guys should be on the right track. But you need to like make sure you write the key word and define it, right? So when it's talking about federalism or cooperative federalism, you need to go cooperative federalism. Just be explicit. Cooperative federalism is the separation of powers between blah 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 blah, and then have that definition. Then answer or give an example of what that means. Give an example. You can give an hypothetical example, or you can actually give a factual example. Cooperative federalism exists within how states uh, could manage funds that to build highways, right? Fictional, right? Real, blah blah blah, right? So give the example. Give me examples. Shows that you know what you're talking about always. Okay. Um, you need to list it out and make sure you have that written out when you guys are doing the uh doing this FRQ, right? So number one, A, B, C, D, and then you guys are fine there. Okay. In Gov, everything's pretty straightforward. In U.S. history, you have to connect them. Sometimes you right. It's like describe the differences between this person's interpretation and that person's. Like no, in Gov, it's gonna give it to you straight up, right? Um, and yeah, I think that's gonna be really important for you guys to understand too. Um, Yeah, the FRQ is pretty straightforward. I don't think I think I was looking through it and I don't think it's asking you to analyze a graph or anything. Usually they had one that was analyze a graph. I'll have to double check that because I'll double check that and let you guys know tomorrow. But the FRQ, as long as you have your cheat sheet in front of you, you're gonna be just fine. Um, Key to the AP verbs. They explain, analyze, or discuss. There's a 4-step process, right? Definition of the key term, example, real or hypothetical. Answer how or why information you're providing answers the question. And then 4, link your answers back to the question. This is why blah, 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 blah. Okay. Rubric for the FRQ, no, because it's content stuff, right? Um, it's content. Those are not, you don't need to write too much. You need to be writing more than one sentence, that's for sure. For every part of the question, I'd write like then 3 to 4 sentences just to be safe, including one sentence being the definition, a second sentence being an example, maybe 2 sentences for example, and then third sentence explaining it. So, um, cheat sheet is your cheat sheet, your documents, not the foundational documents. Like literally everything that we've been working on in terms of like, hey, make a cheat sheet for unit 1. Like when you guys reviewed the concepts in class, the things that we've been literally doing the last couple of weeks, it should all be there. Okay. So that's
Mr. Lou,
what's up.
when you're answering the FRQ, you list out, right? So it's like part A, and then you do like a little, you literally write A, and then you answer that part of the question.
Yes.
B, and then right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the unit study guides are going to be important in this. If it's thorough, you're awesome. But if it's too thorough, you can't find your information. So, my ask of you tonight is to go through your unit guides, understand what's being said in your unit study guides or your cheat sheets, and make sure you know how to reference your information. Okay. Tomorrow is partially going to be a test of how quick you can write and how much you understand the information. But 2, it's also partially for us to figure out, hey, can you organize yourself? You know what the test is going to look like. There's no secret to how this test is going to look like. You know it's going to be 2 questions. You know the first one's going to ask you about foundational documents. You know which foundational documents. And then you know that the second one is going to be explanations. I'm willing to bet that the second one will probably have some sort of court case that might be tied to it. So understanding your civil liberties and civil rights notes in those court cases are going to be really important. Understanding the different clauses, right? The freedom of expression clause and the establishment clause of the First Amendment, right? Understanding the due process clause, um, and all of that stuff. That's going to be really important. Okay. Um, so that's my ask of y'all. In terms of getting ready for tomorrow, the packet's going to be huge. Can I actually ask? Did you guys get your emails with your AP ID and your e-ticket?
Yes.
If you didn't, or you have no idea what I'm talking about, you need to go to your AP website, your AP Classroom or AP College Board website to see if your e-ticket is on there. Okay. Other than that, preparation is knowing the rubric. Preparation is knowing how this uh, test is going to look like. Preparation is finishing your cheat sheet for foundational documents, and preparation is getting your OneNote organized and stuff. This is my last part that I'm going to talk to you guys about. A lot of you guys have cheat sheets and unit stuff that is shared between all of you. Tonight and tomorrow morning, we're going to spend some time on this, but for you all to get a head start on this would be tonight. Tonight, your job is to copy your, go to the one that's shared. Okay. Let's just say Luis, Valeria, and Edgardo had a shared cheat sheet. You need to go into that, copy that into either your OneNote or copy that into another folder with Google Docs, because what you cannot do is have a shared document open while you are testing. Okay. Let me repeat that. Do not get caught, or don't do it. Just copy and paste it. Literally, it's the same information, just on a different in your OneNote. Okay. If you have a shared Google Doc, copy and paste it into OneNote, copy and paste it into a running cheat sheet that is only accessible by you. Okay. It's not a hard ask. It literally is. This is going to help you organize it anyways, right? You're going to go into your OneNote and you're going to, oh man, I have this empty document. I don't want to click in and have an empty document. Delete the documents that you aren't using. Have your AP, all your review stuff in one of your open sections or in one Google Doc, however you feel like you're going to organize it and use it, and copy and paste it in there so that only you can access it so you don't get in trouble.
Can we make a copy of the actual document?
Exactly. That's what I'm saying. Make a copy of it, but just don't accidentally access the one. Yes, I'm not. Well, it's not cheating because they're telling us, but yes, I am telling you how to properly cheat. Um, yeah, yeah. So, um, m- hopefully that makes sense. Make a copy, but don't access the one that everyone's sharing. That would just be a dumb mistake, especially because they're letting you take open notes. Any other questions?
Is the test gonna be like 1, 2, 3, and 4 still?
What do you mean?
Ninth grader?
Yes, it's still out of 5. Yep. So my guess, an average FRQ 2, uh, the FRQ 2 is about 5 points, and there's 7 points. So it's out of 12 points. If you can secure, I'm gonna tell you this: if you can secure 6 out of the 7 points in your argumentative essay, let's just say you drop the ball on one of your explaining your examples, right? That's fine. Then you get like half of the first one. You're gonna pass with the 3. Everyone, okay. I'm going to be severely disappointed in you if if you cannot pass with at least a 3. Because you have a cheat sheet. You know what's going to happen. We've been prepping for this for the last, those of you guys from once we got into quarantine, that last week of quarter 3, we've been doing this. So then those of you guys that haven't been showing up, hopefully you guys weren't showing up because you were pretty confident. So you guys, we're in a good spot. It's just bringing it all together. And so tonight, go through your cheat sheets, put them in the right organization, figure that out. Yeah, no pressure. Okay.
Mr. Lou, quick question.
What's up, Edgardo?
So when you actually like say that you're taking the test and you want to take an excerpt from the foundational document or something like that. Say I have that propped up on my search because I searched it up and they said that I could search. Can I copy and paste that part of the search, or is that not allowed?
What do you mean copy and paste that part of search? So
Like straight up take it from the foundational document.
yeah, I mean
copy
you
and
wanna
paste
you
it.
wanna have an excerpt in there, but my ask is that your quotations be limited to not don't do a full sentence, do sections of it. And then secondly, rephrase it. If you have it in front of you, you can rephrase it. You go Federalist 10 and you have your excerpt on that line on factions. James Madison argues blah blah blah, right? You can literally just say James Madison argues that. Sorry, say that.
We don't have to actually have it in quotes because that's my problem. Like I don't want to have to go through the whole document.
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't have. You don't need to. Definitely, you don't need to. But I will say,
Oh, thank God.
I will say though, specific evidence points to specific parts of it. So that's where the cheat sheet that I've given you is. Um. So like, um, if you have the evidence that's in quotes there already, you should be able to, you know, take that. So like, take it straight from your cheat sheet.
So
Yep. Any other questions?
for the argumentative essay, you know how we used to do like context for the intro, like you had to talk about. That was for APUSH. Do we still have to do that for this one?
No, you don't need contextualization. Just make sure you are explaining all the concepts of your thesis and your claim.
Because the rubric says 3 paragraph, right?
Does it?
It says row A, row B, row C. I'm guessing those are paragraphs.
No. That's just how they're gonna grade you. So yes, you should have a paragraph with an introduction, and then row B would technically be like 2 paragraphs, and then row C could be 1 paragraph.
So 4 paragraphs in like 25 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Cool.
Yeah, Mr. I have a question.
What's up, Oscar?
So if so for the test, like you recommend that we do like the first paragraph be like our claim / thesis,
Mm-hmm.
and then the second and third be like each evidence with the explanation of the evidence.
Exactly.
And then leave the like connecting the evidence to the claim for the fourth.
Yes.
So like we shouldn't even like tie that evidence into the claim.
You could. If you feel comfortable tying it into the claim in your second and third paragraph, that's fine. Just make sure you have a fourth paragraph wrapping it all up.
Okay. All right, makes sense.
Yep. Any other questions? Okay, hey. Uh-huh.
The review tomorrow in the morning.
So here's how tomorrow's gonna work for those of you guys that are trying to jump in on Teams and whatnot. So looking at normally I'd see second period at 10 o'clock, right? So we're just gonna open it up and we'll have a free forum on Teams at 10, and then 10 to 12 we'll do that, and then sometime during 10 to 12 I want to meet with each of you guys to make sure you know how you're doing paper, if you're doing it on paper and the uploading function, and if you're doing if you're doing digital and you understand that, make sure everyone runs through AP demo section, and that you guys are good to go in that sense. And then yeah, and then lastly, we'll go through all of the AP stuff in terms of the numbers and the dates, or not numbers, the timing of that at 12ish. So we're the first ones for our school taking a AP test, so that's going to be important. Edgar, I'll get to that a little bit tomorrow. Hopefully that'll be okay. Just make sure you guys have your cheat sheets and stuff all tied together. So thanks, 1,000 subscribers. Any last questions in terms of that? Let's end this a little early and we'll be good to go. All right, Coolio. Yes, Edgardo. Yes, you can. All right, awesome, y'all. I think we are good to go for this session. Hopefully you enjoyed it, or maybe you didn't enjoy it, but hopefully it was helpful. I'll post it, and then make sure Oscar, no, you're not. Don't lie. Don't lie. Don't lie like that. What's wrong with you? So yeah. Hopefully you guys feel a little bit more prepared. I feel confident with y'all. So I'll see you guys tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Enjoy the rest of your nights. Make sure you tell your mom how much you appreciate them. And we will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. Otherwise, sleep in. Make sure you get your stuff ready. Peace out, y'all. No problem. No problem. I'll stick around if anyone has any individual questions for a few minutes. See you in the mornings. See y'all. See y'all later. Any last questions? You guys good? $10 tomorrow, Anthony. All right, y'all. See you guys later. I'm out if there's no questions.